The moment he looked through me, I knew he had already judged me. My sister's future father-in-law didn't ignore me by accident. No, he was calculated, practiced, the kind of dismissal that comes from a man who spent decades deciding who matters and who doesn't. He brushed past me at the wedding reception without so much as a nod. I stood there in a navy silk dress, champagne in hand, watching him greet investors, lawyers, men with expensive watches and louder laughs. And he didn't know something. He didn't know that for the past 6 months he'd been trying to quietly acquire a tech company that I co-founded. A company his own empire depended on. A company I built while raising my sister after our world collapsed. But men like him don't look twice at women standing quietly in the corner. That was his first mistake. And in less than 10 minutes, I was going to introduce myself. They say grief arrives like a wave. That's not true. It arrives like a phone call at 2:17 in the morning. It arrives as silence on the other end of the line before someone clears their throat and says, "Marina, there's been an accident." I was 23. Finals week. Exhausted. Surviving on caffeine and ambition. My little sister, Alara, was 18. 1 month away from graduation. Our mother had disappeared years before, chasing a better life that didn't include us. So when my father died on that rain-slick highway, it wasn't just loss. It was demolition. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and sympathetic faces. But the real devastation came 3 days later. Debt. Loans I never knew existed. Overdue payments. Legal notices stacked like accusations. My father had tried to keep his business afloat. He'd failed quietly. And once he was gone, the world didn't hesitate to collect. We lost the house first. Then the car. Then the workshop he loved more than anything. All that remained were 2 suitcases and a future that felt like fog. I remember sitting on the bare apartment floor of our temporary rental while Alara cried into my shoulder. And that's when it hit me. No one else was coming. I was it. I became sister and guardian in the same breath. But that wasn't even the hardest part. The hardest part was pretending I wasn't terrified. I worked mornings at a cafe before class. Evenings answering customer support emails for a logistics firm. Weekends delivering packages in neighborhoods that smelled like money. I slept 4 hours a night. Sometimes less. There were days I sat in lectures still smelling like espresso grounds. I lost friends. I lost a relationship with a man who told me gently, "You're never really here anymore." He wasn't wrong. I wasn't. I was surviving. Every dollar stretched across 2 plates. Every decision filtered through one question. Will this protect Alara? She never complained. She studied. She got into community college. She pretended not to notice when I skipped meals. And I pretended not to notice when she cried quietly at night. But something changed in me during those years. I stopped needing applause. I stopped needing recognition. I needed stability. And I would build it with my bare hands if I had to. The opportunity came disguised as risk. A former classmate, Adrian Vale, messaged me one night. "We're building automation software for enterprise backend systems. It's rough, but it works. I need someone who understands operations and people." It sounded unstable. Sounded dangerous. It sounded alive. I hadn't felt alive in years. So I said yes. From 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., I worked corporate compliance. From 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. I built a company out of borrowed servers and stubborn belief. Coffee shops became our office. My apartment couch became my war room. There were nights I fell asleep with my laptop still open, code reflecting against the ceiling. Money ran thin. One co-founder quit. Investors said no. And again. I thought it was over more times than I can count. But then, a mid-level corporation tested our platform. Their processing time dropped by 38% in 1 quarter. They told another company. And another. And suddenly our inbox exploded. Demos. Contracts. Partnerships. Adrian became the public face. Interviews. Panels. Industry events. I stayed behind the curtain. I handled infrastructure. Clients. Damage control. I liked it that way. Because while others chased visibility, I chased peace. Within 3 years, Alara transferred to a state university. We had savings. Health insurance. A working dishwasher that didn't sound like it was dying. Luxury in my world. No one saw how hard it had been. And I didn't need them to. But that invisibility, it would come back around. Marina, Elara said one Tuesday night, voice shaking with excitement. I'm engaged. I almost dropped the bowl I was washing. You're what? To Daniel. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was nervous. Nervous? About telling me? That stung more than I expected. But I swallowed it. Does he treat you well? She laughed softly. He's good. Steady. You'll like him. We planned a dinner. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there with flowers and a nervous smile. He was polite. Kind of. Clearly in love with my sister. Then I heard his last name. Reeves, he said. My stomach tightened. Any relation to Charles Reeves? He hesitated. That's my father. And just like that, the pieces clicked. Charles Reeves, CEO of Reeves Global. One of our largest enterprise clients. And the man aggressively attempting to acquire our company for 6 months straight. The same man who had just walked past me at his son's wedding like I was background decor. He didn't know who I was. But he was about to. And what happened next? Changed everything. The first time I met Charles Reeves face to face, he looked at me like I was temporary. It was at the formal family dinner 2 weeks before the wedding. A private country club. Crystal glasses. Low lighting. The kind of place where deals are made between courses. Elara squeezed my hand under the table. Just be yourself, she whispered. I smiled. Always am. Charles entered the room 10 minutes late, commanding attention without asking for it. Tailored suit. Silver at his temples. The kind of confidence built from winning. When Daniel introduced us, Charles gave me a handshake so brief it barely registered. Oh, he said, scanning me quickly. You're the sister. Just the sister. Not guardian. Not provider. Not co-founder. Not the reason his logistics division ran 40% faster last quarter. Just the sister. Our father passed years ago, I said evenly when he asked why he hadn't met him. Yes, Daniel mentioned something like that, he replied, already turning his attention elsewhere. Something like that. I felt the old instinct rise in my chest, the urge to prove myself, to correct him, to say, actually, I built something you rely on every day. But I didn't. Because I wanted to see how he behaved when he thought I was nobody. That's when you learn who someone really is. Dinner moved forward with polite conversation. Charles spoke about acquisitions, expansion strategies, strategic consolidation. I knew exactly what he meant. He wanted my company. Not to grow it. To absorb it. To own it. To make it disappear under his brand name. He glanced at me midway through dessert. And what is it you do, Marina? There was. The investor sniff test. I work in operations, I replied calmly. Not a lie. Just not the full truth. He nodded in mild approval. Stability is important. I almost smiled. You have no idea. That night Adrian called me. So, he said carefully, you finally met him. Yes. And? I stared at the ceiling. He underestimates people who don't introduce themselves loudly. Adrian laughed softly. That could work in our favor. He wasn't wrong. Because over the past 6 months, Charles had increased his buyout offers. Each one more aggressive. Each one framed as a generous opportunity. But here's what he didn't know. We weren't looking to sell. We were preparing to scale. Quietly. And we were weeks away from launching a new enterprise-level update that would double our valuation overnight. He thought he was circling prey. He didn't realize the prey had teeth. Wedding week arrived in a blur. Elara was glowing. The kind of happiness that makes you forgive the world for everything it took from you. The morning of the ceremony, she hugged me tightly. You gave me this life, she whispered. Oh, I fought for it. There's a difference. But I didn't say that. Instead, I walked her down the aisle. Not because tradition demanded it, but because I had earned that place. And as the music swelled, I felt something settle in my chest. Peace. For the first time in years. I thought maybe that was enough. I was wrong. The reception sparkled. Champagne towers. Soft jazz. Laughter echoing across marble floors. I kept to the edges of conversations. Observing. Charles stood near the head table surrounded by executives. At one point our eyes met. He looked through me again. Deliberate. Dismissive. And I felt nothing. Because in less than 5 minutes, I was scheduled to speak. I hadn't requested it. Apparently Daniel had insisted. Elara wouldn't be here without her, he told the planner. That caught me off guard. Maybe he was different from his father after all. The MC tapped the microphone. And now, a few words from the bride's sister. A hush fell over the room. I walked to the stage slowly. Heart steady. Voice calm. Good evening, I began. For those who don't know me, I'm Marina Hale, Alara's older sister. Polite applause. I continued. But I wasn't always just her sister. The room quieted. When our father died, I was 23. She was 18. And there was no one else. Glasses lowered. Forks paused. I didn't have time to grieve. I had rent to cover. Tuition to figure out. A future to hold together. Alara was already crying. Daniel squeezed her hand. Charles had turned fully toward me now. Listening. I worked mornings. Nights. Weekends. I lost relationships. I lost sleep. But I never lost sight of one thing. I looked directly at my sister. She deserved stability. Silence. Heavy. Intent. And somewhere in between all of that, I helped build a software company. That landed. I felt the shift instantly. A platform now used by some of the largest corporations in this country. Murmurs rippled across the room. Charles's posture changed. Just slightly. We started with borrowed equipment and belief, I said. Today we support enterprise systems processing billions in annual transactions. Now people were whispering. Connecting dots. And I wasn't done. But this isn't about business, I added softly. It's about resilience. It's about protecting the people you love long before anyone's watching. I raised my glass. To Alara and Daniel. May you always choose partnership over pride. Applause filled the room. I stepped down. And that's when I felt it. A presence behind me. Charles. Marina, he said carefully. His tone had changed. Respect etched into it. You're the co-founder of Synexus Systems. Not a question. A realization. Yes. A long pause. I had no idea. I know. His jaw tightened slightly. Why didn't you mention it? I met his eyes. Because I wanted you to see how you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you. Silence. Controlled. He studied me like a new variable in an equation. And that's when I realized something. He wasn't embarrassed. He was recalculating. And that was far more dangerous. I thought the revelation was the climax. I thought the shift in power was enough. But what happened the next morning proved I had underestimated him too. And this time, he wasn't going to ignore me. The morning after the wedding, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. Unknown number. I already knew who it was. Marina Hale, I answered calmly. A brief pause. Charles Reeves. Of course. His voice had lost its casual arrogance. It was sharper now. Measured. I'd like to continue our acquisition discussion, he said. Privately. I stared out the window at the early light cutting through the city skyline. Acquisition. Not congratulations. Not appreciation for the speech. Not acknowledgement of what I had done for my sister. Straight to business. That's a conversation for my co-founder, I replied evenly. Yes, he said smoothly. But I'd prefer to speak to the decision maker. That made me smile. You already are. Silence. A beat too long. Lunch, he said finally. Today. He wasn't asking. And that was his second mistake. I met him at a glass-walled restaurant overlooking the river. Neutral territory. Public enough to prevent theatrics. Private enough for negotiation. He was already seated when I arrived. Power move. I didn't acknowledge it. Instead, I sat across from him and placed my phone face down on the table. You've built something impressive, he began without preamble. Synexus has grown faster than projected. You've seen our numbers. Yes. And you still want to buy us? His lips curved faintly. I want to integrate you. There was. Integrate. A softer word for control. He slid a folder across the table. The number inside was higher than his previous offer. Significantly higher. Enough to make most founders dizzy. Enough to change my life permanently. Enough to ensure Alara would never worry about money again. For a split second, I felt it. The temptation. But that wasn't even the worst part. Attached to the proposal was a clause. A retention structure. I'd stay on for 18 months. Then transition out. Synexus would become Reeves Global Automation. Our name gone. Our independence gone. Everything we'd built folded into his empire. You'd be wealthy, he said calmly. And secure. I closed the folder. I already am. He leaned back slightly, studying me. You're emotional about this. Oh, I was precise. You tried to undervalue us 6 months ago, I said quietly. You assumed we'd fold under pressure. That's negotiation. No, I corrected him. That's assumption. His eyes sharpened. You're in a competitive market. So am I. This is business. I held his gaze. And business reveals character. The air between us shifted. He wasn't used to resistance from people he considered smaller players. But I wasn't smaller. He just hadn't been looking closely. Let me be candid, he said finally. If I can't acquire Synexus, I'll build a competing platform. And I have the capital to scale it quickly. There was not a threat, but close. I folded my hands calmly on the table. You could try. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. You're confident. No, I said. I'm prepared. What he didn't know, what no one outside our core team knew, was that our next platform update was already in beta with 3 Fortune 500 clients. Our AI-driven optimization model was proprietary, patent pending, 2 years ahead of anything publicly visible. He thought he could replicate us in 12 months. He couldn't. And I didn't tell him that. Because sometimes power is knowing something the other person doesn't. Why? He asked suddenly. Why what? Why stay independent? Every company has a price. I almost laughed. He truly believed that. Because I didn't build Synexus to sell it to the highest bidder, I said softly. I built it to protect something. He frowned slightly. My sister. That seemed to confuse him. When my father died, no one stepped in, I continued. No investors. No safety net. I promised myself I'd never be at someone else's mercy again. He was quiet now. Listening. For you, I added, this is expansion strategy. For me, it's autonomy. The word hung there. Autonomy. It wasn't about ego. It was about control over my future. And I wasn't surrendering it. He exhaled slowly. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's mine to make. We stood at the same time. Neither of us extended a hand. I hope, he said coolly, that your confidence doesn't become regret. I met his eyes steadily. I hope your pride doesn't become expensive. And I walked away. That should have been the end of it. I declined the offer formally the next day. Adrian supported the decision without hesitation. We don't need him, he said. Not anymore. But 3 weeks later, one of our mid-sized enterprise clients terminated their contract unexpectedly. Then another. Then another. At first I told myself it was coincidence. Market fluctuation. Budget restructuring. But then our sales director forwarded me an email thread. Reeves Global had launched a pilot automation solution. Aggressively discounted. Free integration. Free onboarding. Free migration assistance. It was strategic. Targeted. Calculated. He wasn't building from scratch. He was undercutting us while building in parallel. Starving us slowly. I stared at the screen, pulse steady but cold. I thought lunch had been a negotiation. It hadn't. It had been reconnaissance. And I had just become a competitor. Officially. Adrian stormed into my office that afternoon. He's playing dirty. No, I corrected quietly. He's playing like he always has. This was who Charles Reeves was. He didn't like losing. And he certainly didn't like being underestimated by someone he had dismissed publicly. But here's what he didn't realize. I had survived worse than corporate warfare. I had survived eviction notices, funeral homes, empty refrigerators, and fear that swallowed whole nights. He thought pressure would break me. He had no idea pressure was where I was forged. I looked at Adrian and said the only thing that mattered. Accelerate the launch. He blinked. You're sure? Yes. If he wanted a war, I wouldn't fight quietly. And what happened next? Forced him to see me in a way he never had before. Accelerate the launch. The words felt calm leaving my mouth. But inside, everything was on fire. Adrian stared at me across the conference table. Marina, we're 2 months from full stabilization. If we push now, there's risk. There's always risk, I replied. But if we wait, he bleeds us slowly. 3 clients gone in 3 weeks. Not random. Not coincidence. Reeves Global was offering contracts at unsustainable rates. Temporary losses for long-term control. Classic Charles. He wasn't trying to compete. He was trying to corner. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt something sharp and electric settle into my chest. Not anger. Clarity. He thought he could intimidate me back into selling. He thought pressure would make me fold. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the email that arrived that Friday evening. Subject line: Strategic Transition Advisory. It wasn't sent to me. It was sent to our shared enterprise clients. In it, Reeves Global subtly questioned the scalability of smaller automation vendors in volatile markets. No names mentioned. But the implication was obvious. He was planting doubt. I read it twice. Then a third time. Slowly. Carefully. He wasn't attacking directly. He was eroding trust. And trust was our lifeline. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I thought it was over after the wedding. I was wrong. That night I drove to Alara's house. She opened the door in sweatpants, hair messy, face warm and familiar. Hey, she smiled. Everything okay? I forced a small one. Yeah. Just needed air. We sat on her back porch. The garden lights glowed softly around us. For a moment I watched her laugh at something Daniel said inside the kitchen. Peace. This is what I built everything for. Not valuations. Not press. This. You don't regret not selling, do you? She asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. Did he say something? She hesitated. Dad's been tense. He thinks you're being stubborn. Of course he did. I exhaled slowly. Alara, I said gently, if I sell because someone pressures me, I'll never respect myself again. She studied me carefully. I trust you, she said. And that was enough. Monday morning I gathered our leadership team. No panic. No dramatics. Just facts. Reeves is undercutting us, I said plainly. He's testing our resilience. Our CTO spoke first. Do we have confirmation he can actually replicate our AI model? No, I said. And that's the point. He didn't. Our proprietary engine was years ahead. But perception moves faster than truth. So what's the move? Adrian asked. I looked around the room. We go public. Silence. Not IPO public. Strategic public. Press. Transparency. Case studies. Performance metrics. If he wanted to imply we were unstable, we'd demonstrate exactly how stable we were. Data doesn't argue. It proves. Over the next 2 weeks we moved like a machine. We released verified performance reports. Independent audit results. Client testimonials. We announced early access to our new predictive optimization engine. Not a teaser. A controlled reveal. And then, we hosted a live virtual demo. Hundreds attended. Executives. Analysts. Competitors. And I stepped into the spotlight myself. No more curtain. No more background. If he wanted to challenge credibility, he would have to challenge me directly. Synexus was built on resilience, I said during the stream. We don't compete by intimidation. We compete by innovation. The chat feed exploded. Questions. Interest. Engagement. Within 48 hours, 2 of the clients who had left requested re-evaluation meetings. 1 returned immediately. And then something unexpected happened. A major industry publication ran a feature. The quiet founder behind Synexus' rapid rise. They mentioned the wedding speech. They mentioned the acquisition refusal. They mentioned independence. Not aggressively, but clearly enough that anyone paying attention would connect the dots. Charles Reeves was paying attention. 3 days later he requested another meeting. This time at our office. That was new. When he arrived there was no arrogance in his stride. Just calculation. He stepped into the conference room and looked around at our team. Screens displaying real-time dashboards. Engineers moving with quiet efficiency. Confidence without noise. You've positioned yourselves well, he admitted. We didn't position, I corrected. We built. Pause. I underestimated you, he said finally. There was. Not loud. Not dramatic. But real. And yet, something in me didn't relax. Because I knew men like Charles didn't admit defeat easily. What do you want? I asked. He looked directly at me. A partnership. Not acquisition. Not integration. Partnership. Revenue sharing. Joint enterprise contracts. Mutual branding. On equal terms. I let the silence stretch. He wasn't offering this out of generosity. He was offering because building from scratch would take too long. And the market had chosen. Not him. But here's the part he didn't expect. I didn't answer immediately. I stood. Walked to the window. Watched the city below. And that's when I realized something important. This was no longer about survival. We had already won that. This was about legacy. And the next decision would define it. I turned back to him slowly. If we do this, I said carefully, it's transparent. No backdoor tactics. No shadow campaigns. Mutual respect. His jaw tightened slightly. You have my word. I held his gaze. And for the first time, he wasn't looking past me. He was looking at me. But whether I would accept, that was a different story. Because what I did next would either end the war or make it permanent. I didn't answer him that day. That was intentional. Power isn't just in the yes or the no. It's in the pause. Charles stood in our glass conference room waiting for my response, and for the first time since I'd known him, he wasn't controlling the tempo. I'll review the terms, I said calmly. We'll get back to you. Not I'll get back to you. Because this wasn't about ego anymore. It was about structure. He gave a small nod. I look forward to it. When he left, the room stayed silent for a few seconds. Adrian exhaled first. That's a full reversal. Not fully, I said quietly. Because I knew something he didn't. Reeves Global stock had dipped 2% the morning after our public demo. Industry analysts were questioning why they hadn't developed proprietary automation sooner. He wasn't here because he respected us. He was here because the market forced him to. And that changes everything. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the proposal in front of me. Revenue projections. Brand alignment. Shared enterprise accounts. It was smart. Profitable. But I kept thinking about that first dinner. The limp handshake. You're just the sister. I thought about eviction notices. About holding Alara while she cried into my sweatshirt. About promising myself I would never kneel financially again. I wasn't building Synexus to be absorbed. But partnership meant leverage. It meant influence inside the largest infrastructure network in the country. It meant we could scale twice as fast without surrendering identity. I closed my eyes. This wasn't about punishing him. Revenge is loud. Power is quiet. And what happened next would define which one I chose. 2 days later we met again. This time I came prepared. Revised terms. Adjusted revenue split. Non-compete clauses. Clear intellectual property protections. And one additional condition. He skimmed the document, brow tightening slightly. You want a public joint announcement acknowledging Synexus as equal innovator, he said. Yes. That's optics. No, I corrected gently. That's respect. A long pause. He studied me the way investors study risk charts. You're very deliberate, he said. I've had to be. He flipped to the last page. If I agree to this, we move forward immediately. Yes. And if I don't? Then we continue scaling without you. No hostility. Just truth. The air felt charged. He picked up the pen. And signed. The joint press conference happened 3 weeks later. Cameras. Industry analysts. A livestream audience larger than our demo. Charles spoke first. Today, Reeves Global enters a strategic partnership with Synexus Systems, an industry leader in automation intelligence. Industry leader. From his mouth. Publicly. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the podium. No shaking hands. No nerves. Synexus was built on resilience and long-term thinking, I said. We're proud to collaborate without compromising who we are. The applause felt different this time. Not because it was louder, but because it was earned. Afterward, as cameras shut off and reporters dispersed, Charles approached me quietly. You negotiated well, he admitted. So did you, I replied. A small pause. I misjudged you, he added. I held his gaze. Yes, you did. He didn't argue. He didn't deflect. For a man like him, that was an apology. And strangely, I didn't need anything more. Months passed. The partnership thrived. Revenue doubled. Client retention stabilized. Our predictive engine became industry standard. But the real shift? It wasn't financial. It was personal. At family dinners, Charles no longer spoke over me. He asked questions. He listened. Not performative listening. Actual listening. One evening, while Alara and Daniel cleared dishes, he lingered at the table. "You protected her," he said quietly. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I built my company the same way. Out of fear of losing control." That surprised me. I hadn't expected vulnerability. "Control feels safe," I said. "Until it isolates you." He gave a faint, thoughtful smile. "Perhaps we're not so different." Maybe not. But I had learned something he hadn't. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated. Alara flourished. She started a non-profit literacy program. Daniel supported her fully. And for the first time since our father died, I watched her live without that shadow behind her eyes. One evening she hugged me tightly. "You don't have to fight anymore," she whispered. He was wrong. I would always fight. But now I chose when and how. Sometimes people still assume I'm quiet because I lack ambition. They see the calm exterior and mistake it for softness. I let them. Because the people who dismiss you when you're silent, they're the same ones who panic when you finally speak. Charles's biggest mistake wasn't trying to buy my company. It wasn't undercutting my contracts. It wasn't even underestimating me. It was assuming that being unseen meant being insignificant. But invisibility can be strategy. Silence can be strength. And dignity? Dignity is power no one can acquire. If there's one thing I learned from all of it, it's this. You don't rise by shouting your worth. You rise by building it so solidly that when someone finally notices, it's too late to dismiss you. I didn't need revenge. I needed recognition earned on my terms. And the little girl who once sat on a bare apartment floor promising her sister she'd fix everything, she kept her word. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. And that is more satisfying than any buyout check could ever be.